Okay, so the next thing we're going to cover today is your final exam. Now, this is a really early introduction to your final exam. Your final exam isn't due until March the 23rd as a final actual submission, but the exam itself is set up into multiple stages of submission purposely so that you can stay on track with this really large, big drawing. Some of you have already reached out for like help with an accommodation because of the size of the drawing. It's going to be 3 foot by 4 foot. And so make sure that you understand that I'm very, very okay with providing accommodations if you have a letter of accommodation, or you have a direct, connection via office meeting with me to discuss any accommodation. Okay, so our assignment for your final exam is going to be self-portraits. Let me see if I think there should be like, yeah, here's some examples. So here's a few examples from former students. And so this is 4 sheets of 18 by 24 paper taped together to create one large sheet of paper, 3 foot by 4 foot. You're going to be working mostly from photograph, but you're going to do a bunch of studies from life because you're always going to get a better understanding of what form looks like from life rather than from photographs, because photographs flatten space and flatten dimensionality. And so as we look at these examples, we can see that the biggest goal really is for a student to I think An was being a little bit of an overachiever here. She's got 6 sheets. I actually just had coffee today with An. She worked in my studio with me for about 4 years and is someone that, showed a lot of promise the first time that I taught her. And then she disappeared. And she never took any other classes. And then one day I went through the Starbucks drive-through and An gave me my drink. And I said, why aren't you in class? Like, get back to school. And she re-enrolled in school and she's just graduating from UW with her degree, her honors degree. It's not all I'm not the I didn't like save the day. Like, I think she was already coming back to school. She just had to take some time off to work. But like, it was, I like to think that at least, she had one more person telling her like to get back into art. Very good, young artists from the start, and self-trained. She never even took drawing one. This is actually from her drawing 2 class, but same assignment. This is another one. Some of these were done in person, some of them were done online. This was done in person, this was done in person, this was done online. So I like to have a variety here to show you how, like, just because we're online doesn't mean you can't do this. This student, her name was Marissa. It's either Marissa or Melissa. This was the best drawing she did all quarter. And she really challenged herself here and she worked incredibly hard on this drawing. And it's bumpy. There's some bumpy moments, but overall it's a really nice drawing. And one of the best things about the drawing is the composition. This composition has a lot going for it in terms of like the pattern and also like the balloons, really strong sort of like compositional choice. These balloons, she had a party for her birthday or something, and her family had come over because we were in shutdown, or she lived with her family, one or the other, and they gave her balloons and she filled the space up with balloons and took her picture. She was really inspired by the Frida Kahlo self-portrait we're going to look at. This student also, this was during shutdown, like in the original shutdown. This student, whose name I don't remember, unfortunately, really nice composition also. Like, I really think this is a really strong drawing. The composite shape where the hair becomes the shirt, like that composite shape is great. The plant in the background is a really nice element. And, you know, I think there could be darker values in the face. I think there could be more anatomical structure in the hands. But overall, this is a really strong drawing. This student was also during shutdown. Really complicated drawing to do. And really, she was quite stubborn. And did most of this work without having any type of like feedback from me. And then when she did give it to me for feedback, we worked together to increase the contrast, specifically on her forehead and on some of the background. But really nice drawing, really well made, really thoughtful approach to the composition, and the likeness is really good. The student, their name was Jack. I think this is a really nice drawing. You're going to use a grid like you see here to help you. I don't mind if the grid remains. That's not my sort of like critique of the drawing. I feel like my critique of the drawing is that it feels very grid by grid versus like overall drawing approach. But the drawing itself, I think, is a really strong drawing technically. You know, the background is really nice and strong. It looks a lot like the student. I just see things like on the hair, for instance, that like I would like to have more of those values kind of like blended, rather than so kind of like piecemeal. It feels very stylistic, I suppose, is kind of like what I'm feeling, versus like this, which feels more about like the gradual value transition. So those are some examples of the project. I kind of forgot that An did this in drawing too, but still very good drawing to look at for an example. All the rest are all drawing one drawings. And then I've got some different videos here for you. A couple of videos of me like working on this like weird self-portrait that I did as a demonstration in class. And then another video on planes and using planes. Obviously here I'm going to be painting, but I'm using planes to talk about like light and shape. Here we're using planes to talk about just light. Okay, so you can see here that there are multiple stages to the assignment. Again, I've done that on purpose. I've set up different stages so you do not attempt to complete this project over a weekend. The first submission is your photograph. So if you click on that, it should take you to the submission. This is due March 3rd. So you're going to upload the photograph you plan on using for your self-portrait final exam. It must meet the following criteria. It must be taken for this project. And so how do I know? Because I'm going to give you lighting requirements. And so if it doesn't meet the lighting requirements, then you know, I know that it's probably an older picture, or an indication that it could be an older picture. It has to be straight on only. Don't think you're going to make this easy by doing some other like profile view. Profile is harder to do than straight on picture. Okay, so it's going to be from the straight on only. Make sure you're looking directly at the camera, and try to get the camera to be as like parallel to you as possible so that you don't accidentally find yourself having to draw like this, sort of underneath chin stuff. It should include your head, your shoulders, and your torso, and both hands. It doesn't have to be your whole torso, but some of it. And the thing I want you to think about is like the position of your hands. Okay, so like, and we're gonna draw hands together. So something like this, you know, is a great pose, but you're also hiding some of the major landmarks on the face that you can use to help you get accuracy in the face, like the eyebrows and the ears. So like where you put your hands, you know, folk, let your body move to the music, move to the, sorry, okay. sorry, I love stuff like that. You know, where you put your hands, think first, what are you covering up? And then if you can't draw hands, like something like this might be really hard. Okay, I would have a hard time with that. Relax your hands, find the movement, find the expressiveness of the hands, but try not to lock your hands. If you do lock your hands, they often come out looking like claws. I've been teaching for a long time, and I'm telling you from experience, that is what happens. Relax your hands. If you're not really good at hands or you're really challenged by hands, then maybe place them somewhere that they're much more relaxed and much more out in the open. And you can see more of them than like, you know, whatever, like hiding a portion in an awkward. I'm trying to not be too awkward, but I'm just going to be awkward because I'm an awkward person. You know, like something like this would be really hard to do. Plus, I'm going to say, wait, I can't see your fingers. You know, you have to have your fingers. No hats, no sunglasses, no bandanas, no face masks, no gas masks. I don't know. No veils or disguises. Okay. Now, if you are, you know, if you're required to wear some type of headscarf or some type of face covering for religious reasons, then reach out to me and talk to me about that. I've had some students who wear like hijab, do their drawing, and then only share it with me, only make sure that I'm the only person to see it. You know, there are ways around these situations that we can always, I'm always willing to sort of have conversations with and discussions around, okay? You know, but obviously, you know, the idea of the project is it's a self-portrait. And so if you cover your face, then that means that we're not really going to be able to get the essence of the self in the way that I'm seeking for this assignment. No smiling. You're going to be really unhappy trying to draw you smiling. Watch what happens when I smile. Like if my face is flat and I'm not smiling. Okay, and then when I smile, do you see all that movement? So zygomatic goes up, orbicularis oris comes back. Okay, rizoris moves, orbicularis oculi moves, frontalis moves. And so like if you try to draw a smile and you draw the smile but you don't draw any of that movement, you're not going to be looking like you're smiling. And so I tell students don't smile to make it easier for you. Drawing teeth, forget it, super hard. Drawing teeth, like really hard to do. Think about when you're creating your photograph, like you're going to be working from this thing for weeks. So if it's a bad photograph, it's going to be a bad drawing. Okay. You can only have one light source. So just like with the egg, think about the placement of the light and what it's doing. I would suggest that you make sure that it's taken with something that can give you a high enough resolution to print it out at 8.5 by 11. And usually I'll tell a student like, okay, so, you know, I'll tell my students like, go to Walgreens and get it printed as big as you can. You know, don't pay an arm and leg for it. Or divide it into quarters and print it out on 4 sheets of paper and type them together. Like how you know, the larger the photo, the better off you're going to be. And then what I suggest students do is have the photograph as a reference, and then they have their screen open so they can zoom in and look at things. Okay. And then it should be black and white. So no color photographs. So these are the requirements for the assignment. And so then when you look at the different stages of the assignment, like you have some studies due. Okay, these are due March 5th. Okay, you're creating a self-portrait for your final exam from a photograph. For the studies though, you're going to draw from life. You may not draw from a photograph for your studies. It has to be from life, so using a mirror. Or if you're drawing your hands, you can draw your hands just by looking at them. Graphite pen, watercolor, pencil, charcoal, whatever you want. I suggest you use some charcoal because you're going to be doing your final exam in charcoal. And so like it's always best to do some of your studies in the materials you can be working with, right? Mixed media paper or any paper you like that meets the size requirements. It's 24 inches by 18 inches. So that's the full size of your pad. It's 2 full pages front and back. So 4 pages total. Now, if you want to just use 4 sheets, you can. Just make sure you have enough sheets left to do all your assignments. So you would need like 4 sheets for your final. You have a portrait recreation to do. You have emotional landscape to do. So I would make sure you've got at least 9 sheets to give yourself space for mess ups. That's why I say front and back, because it will save you paper. Okay, so the points for this assignment, right? It's only 75 points, but I still expect 10 hours. Why for so little? Because your studies are what's going to help you set up to make your final exam. And if your studies are bad, your final exam will be bad. So then you have some check-ins, so first progress. So this will be actually where you put the first photograph of the work so far of all 4 sheets together. And you will have some drawing if you want points. If you don't have any drawing, you don't get points for just having 4 sheets of paper taped together. Then you have a second check-in. It's called self-portrait 3 because your studies are 1 and then these check-ins happen. Okay. And that's where you're going to put the next bout of progress. And then after that, we'll have, I'll probably make another one for you to check in since many of you aren't coming to the volunteer class. But usually I'll run like an all-day open studio where everybody can come and show your work and talk to me. Your final submission is going to be photographic. Okay, it should be as high quality as you can make it. You're going to include 3 detailed photographs of your drawing of the areas you think are the most successful. Okay. And then you will turn it in, and then sadly, we won't have a big class critique, but I will provide some feedback. Okay. So I have a presentation here for you about self-portraits. So I always, as always with you, as always, sorry about that. As always, I want to contextualize your work. So we're going to look at some historic and some modern examples of self-portrait. So we begin here with the Northern Renaissance. This is a drawing by Albrecht Dürer, who was a Northern Renaissance artist. He's considered the first person to really work with watercolor the way that we think about watercolor today. And this is just it's either a silver point or a graphite drawing on paper. And what we see here is like a pretty emotional individual. You know, they're looking off to the side. They have a little bit of a look in their face of kind of like sadness, or they're like exhausted or tired. What they have in their hands are tools of flagellation. So flagellation was the process in many sort of Christian belief systems of atoning for your sins through self-harm. And so there would be like whips and bundles of sticks, and you would publicly harm yourself with these tools as a way to atone to God for a sin that you did. And so here we see this is like called self-portrait after flagellation. We can see in his face this kind of like expression of, perhaps it's prior to the flagellation and he feels a bit like apprehensive, or maybe it's after the flagellation and he's just exhausted and tired. And there's all different kinds of self-portraits in here, y'all. I'm really kind of like trying to have you think about how do you actually like, how do you frame what a self-portrait may be? This is Hokusai, who's most famous as a woodcut artist. He did the Great Wave, which is a very well-known ukiyo-e print from the Edo period of Japan. Hokusai was a brilliant artist, a master artist. He learned many different techniques in his life in the printing process. And every time he learned a new technique, he got a new name. So the name he died with was not the name he was born with. What's cool about like ukiyo-e printmaking is that many of the shops that were the places that the masters would make the prints, the wood block carvers, the paper makers, the ink makers, the printers were often all either women or female identifying individuals. So there was in Edo at this time a third gender, and many of those individuals, there are a number of wood blocks of those individuals, and they also played a role in the printing process. Here we see Hokusai. He kind of has this like classic, like joyful, older human sort of energy and expression, and he's looking off into the sky. This is one of my favorite European painters, Louise Elizabeth Vigée Lebrun. And she was a aristocratic young woman. This is her, I think she's about like 21 here. And she was the court painter for Marie Antoinette. Now, it was uncommon, but not as uncommon as we're led to believe. But it was uncommon for women to be artists. It was, like I said, not as uncommon as we're led to believe. But we don't have the names of many female artists because of the way that history was written through a patriarchal lens. And also, like, who gets remembered is another big question, okay? And who gets remembered is a huge, massive moment right now well, that question is creating a huge moment right now of art history, as art historians are going back and looking at like the Baroque painters and finding all these, you know, female painters who were really well known in their day as painters who were just not chosen by the writers and the historians to elevate because they weren't men. And that is all very true, and it's very real. And a lot of what's going on right now in art history is going back and re-examining art history through a less patriarchal, less racist lens, and finding all these artists that were left out of the books and the shows and the catalogs. And Lebrun, though, is one who was remembered. And one of the reasons why she was remembered was because she was the court painter for the queen, right? She painted Marie Antoinette. And here she is at her easel, and she's gazing directly at us, which is really important. She is engaging with the viewer and giving us a complete sense of her command, not only of her skill with her painting, but also of her belief that she belongs at that easel. Here she is again in a brilliant painting. I love this painting of her with the straw hat. Obviously, she's older here. She may have been elevated a little bit in terms of her class status. But we still see her like giving you that calling card, right? She's still providing you the information that she's a painter. Look what's in her hand, the palette, the brushes. These are all the tools of the artist, and she is, you know, kind of like showing us who she is. I adore that hat, and the shadow from the hat on her face is so amazing. The next person here is Rembrandt van Rijn. You all know Rembrandt, I hope. I always tell people Rembrandt is more than just a toothpaste. Rembrandt is really one of the first, like, really highly renowned painters in the Dutch canon, who left us a history of themselves. You know, Rembrandt today, I mean, like, you would need, you know, if not a million to buy like a small piece, you know, tens of millions to buy a medium piece, hundreds of millions to buy a large piece. Uh, uh, he died broke. He was bankrupt when he died. And the reason that he was bankrupt was because he loved really lovely things. And so a lot of the armor you see in his paintings, a lot of the costumes, those were things he purchased with the money he made from his paintings. And he was a great aficionado of buying objects. And actually at the end of his life, the court made his son the steward of the money because Rembrandt was like just bankrupting everyone in his family. This is an etching. It's a drawing made on a piece of copper that is etched in acid. The lines that are made with a stylus into the copper will later hold ink during a printing process. So here he is here. He was great at doing all these expressions. Here he is again. Now this composition is a brilliant composition. The white hat is just astounding in terms of its value-based illumination against this sort of like darker coat and this green-gray background. What I find so brilliant about this painting is this circle here and this circle there. What are they? Why are they there? You know, for us, we could say, well, these are like sort of like abstract painting moments. They could have just been compositional choices that he made. Who knows? But they're really shocking, I think, as a background element for a painting for this time period. Rembrandt would put sand and glass into his paint, so especially on the noses, when you walk into a room of Rembrandt paintings, like at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., they have a room of Rembrandt self-portraits. The noses are like these dimensional things that step out from the canvas. They're really quite brilliant. We'd call that impasto paint. This painting I really like. It's the Joseph de Croo painting. I think it's called A Scoundrel in the Street Mocking You, I think is something like that. It's a self-portrait as a scoundrel. The foreshortening of the finger is so magnificent. The foreshortening of the hand with the cane is so magnificent. And just the expression, like the teeth, the movement of the cheeks, the glint in the eyes. There's something really both you know, astoundingly technical and mocking. You know, he's obviously mocking us, he's laughing at us. And it's, I think, such a potent and powerful self-portrait. Okay, so this is the Chinese artist Pan Yueling. She was born in China and was orphaned at a very young age. She unfortunately was sold into sex work, but while working as a sex worker, she found her husband who later married her. Her husband was very supportive of her art career and helped her to attend the Shanghai School of Painting. And then later she moved to Paris, where she studied at the Beaux-Arts, which is a famous French art school. Her work kind of combines these styles of Western painting, such as Impressionism or Fauvism, with Chinese calligraphic painting and traditional sort of Chinese art practices. Because she depicted nude women, her work was seen as being too controversial in China. She never returned to China. She died in France. She was an extremely independent woman and never joined a gallery, even though galleries requested her to join them, like to become a gallery that represented her art. She always remained fiercely independent. Here we see her staring directly at the viewer, and she's wearing a traditional Chinese garment. And it creates this really beautiful composite shape between the hair and then the garment and then the chair. And then these really like sort of like rendered forms of the flesh, but then this outline that kind of creates a sense of flatness. So definitely a lot of European and Chinese influence here. Here she is again, very different type of garments. You know, here we have her in a traditional Chinese garment. Here we have her in a much more Western style garment. Her hair is sort of like cut into the style of the sort of like 1920s, 1930s woman that was in particular prevalent in Europe. And again, staring right at us, hand on the table. We can see in both of these paintings that the table is part of the compositional space and the tools of the composition. And we're just seeing a lot of, I think, really great command of the handling of the paint and the structure of the composition. I think she's a very impressive painter, and I believe at one time she either taught at or ran the Shanghai School of Art before she went to France. So very impressive artist, to be sure. Picasso comes to France from Spain, is, you know, from a very young age, a very formidable artist. And begins his practice as an artist within this very sort of like representational, expressive sort of place. Of course, later on goes on to invent Cubism with Georges Braque, who was his studio mate. And then from there goes through many different movements and motions in his lifetime. But he was always written about for having like these very piercing eyes. And so here we really see these very dark, very piercing eyes. Egon Schiele is Dutch, I think. Fin de Siècle movement, very heavy outlines, very sort of like expressive, emotional figure. The potency of the nude male, which would have been considered as it is today, perhaps far more shocking than the nude female, thanks to the histories of Western European art. Here he is again. You can see almost very sort of like skeleton-based sort of shapes, and refinement of edges is basically sort of like value-based inside a dark, heavy outline. Very emotional content. Frida Kahlo, Mexican artist, and married to Diego Rivera, who was another very famous Mexican artist. And when, you know, in terms of like the history of art, I would imagine that most people imagine that Diego Rivera would stand out as the most important of the two, but today that's just not so true. Frida Kahlo is probably one of the most recognized um, uh, female painters. She was a surrealist, and when she was sort of younger, she was in this horrible accident and ended up having to be bedridden, and she had to wear these special corsets and like all kinds of stuff. She was on a bus that got into an accident, and that greatly affected like her relationship to herself. We can see here that this painting is just full of symbols, whether it's like the butterflies or the hummingbird or the thorns around her neck. There's a lot of symbols going on here. And the butterflies were influential on the student I showed you in the room filled with balloons, because she wanted to have butterflies in her hair based on the relationship to this painting. Diego Rivera, her husband, made these huge, massive socialist murals. And interestingly, a lot of American industrialists had Diego Rivera create all these murals because they're all about like labor and production. But Diego Rivera himself was actually a socialist. And so it's kind of interesting, like the relationship between like capitalism and socialism. Kathy Kalowitz is a German expressionist. She is painting between the period of post-World War I, and World War II. She had a number of family members die in World War I on the German side. She made art her entire life. And this is one of the best drawings in all of Western art history. I would say this is probably, if not my favorite, one of my favorite drawings made in all of Western art history. The thing that I love about this drawing the most is this mark. You must have so much command and ability of a material to do a mark like that and to have it read the way you wanted it to read. It's a brilliant, brilliant mark, brilliant, brilliant painting by a brilliant woman. Here she is again as a younger woman. This is an ink drawing. All these lovely marks. When ink or watercolor does this kind of like granulation like this, we call it reticulation, when it creates these edges like a tidal wave. Pardon me, not a tidal wave, a tidal pool. Very different, Vaughn. And the edges become this sort of like, a little bit darker, a little bit heavier as the liquid kind of seeps around those edges against that boundary of the dried material around it. But this granulation and just the texture is lovely on this drawing. Here she is later on as an older woman. This is an etching. Brilliant artist. Francis Bacon, really, really well-known British artist. Died in like the early 90s, I think. Was known for these extremely expressive abstracted portraits that he would make by taking photographs of people in like photo booths and then abstracting from those photographs. He once talks about the act of making art to be like the violence of a rose, which is like, the rose being this beautiful thing, but in order for it to maintain its beauty, it has to be prepared to, that the growth of the tree is thorny, right? Like all the stems. And so it's like violence to protect this rose. So the act of life being created itself and protecting the most important things is the act of painting for Bacon when he was alive. And so here he is in these self-portraits here. Here he is again. He was an openly gay man in England during a period of time when that was illegal. he won a very, very famous prize in Paris. And when the Queen found out, she said, "Dear God, not that horrible man." That was in a documentary I watched about Bacon. Really well-known painter, very well-known painter. Andy Warhol, as an artist, I don't really find Andy Warhol to be very exciting. I do recognize his importance, but to me, he's as aesthetically enjoyable as looking at a can of soup, which is my Andy Warhol joke. But this one I actually kind of like. I like all these multiple overly printed or overlaid and printed self-portrait images on top of this painted sort of acrylic background. Trent Dora Hancock is a contemporary artist who I used to do work for at the printmaking facility I worked at. He would come and I would help print his prints. When he was in college, he developed this like narrative around like vegans and meat eaters, and the meat eaters became like these like characters, and then the vegans are like these mound people. And he's really interested in like toys. In fact, he's done some plush toys lately as editions of prints, where he's made toys as sculpture. And I think it's really fascinating that he's been working with this same narrative for like 20 years. But enjoyable imagery for certain. This is Beverly McIver. She teaches at Duke University. I always really like her paintings. I really like her color palette. And she's someone who I've met, and she was part of a conference that I attended to, and I spent some time with her, and she was really awesome, and really, I think, just a really great contemporary painter. Jenny Saville is another contemporary artist. Here we see her from below in this like distorted photographic sort of manner. All the lines on her body are lines that like plastic surgeons make to indicate sort of areas that are going to be, worked on. And she actually worked with this plastic surgeon to understand the process of plastic surgery. And she is neither for nor opposed to plastic surgery, but she likes the language of drawing on the bodies. And this is one of her self-portraits, and this is the other one. She's actually a pretty small, pretty petite woman. But she uses the camera as a tool through manipulation and distortion. And so here we see her sitting on like this banister thing, and then we have this sort of like really expressive sort of color palette and a very expressive sort of like gesture in her hands, kind of like clawing at her skin. Juan Quick to See Smith is an Indigenous artist. She had her first show, her first like major museum show was actually at Tacoma Art Museum. And she's really well known for doing prints and paintings. Here we can see that we have this like really sort of like Vitruvian sort of like figure from like Leonardo's Vitruvius Man. And then we have this large X. And so we can start to read into the concept and idea of this individual being a representative symbol for Indigenous communities, and this large X being, some type of target. So here's some more student examples of self-portraits. The student, we worked on this drawing for quite some time. It's 18 by 24. I really like this drawing. The folds are really nice. Things like stripes are rad for distorting space. I use stripes for years in my work because you can distort space and create space through stripes. It's really cool. So the patterns that you wear for your photograph can really help your drawing be successful. The student was from the same class, and I'm still in connection with both of these students. The student kind of does some drawing sometime. This student doesn't do any drawing, and every now and then I'll write to her on Instagram and say, where are my drawings? Brilliantly talented young woman. And she spent so long on this drawing. You know, the hair was such a difficult thing to do, but we really worked on it. You know, first by creating darkness and then lifting out light to create the texture of the braids. Really great self-portrait, I think. This was from a different class. This was actually life-size self-portrait. So this is 8 foot by 4 foot. And the student wanted to be an engineer, I believe it was. And so this is a Tesla coil. And then she's sitting in front of the Tesla coil studying. And I really liked with this drawing, just the level of work she did on things like the chair and the Tesla coil and the shoes. I think really shows how she really thought about this whole space as being a really important space to work within. This student I actually just brought some stuff from. She runs a small store now where she makes clothing and jewelry. She was really into cosplay, and she would make all these amazing outfits, and she still does that, and she makes a living doing that. It's really amazing. This was a life-size self-portrait. And we worked a long time on kind of like jumping back and forth between what she wanted to do and what I wanted her to do. And so by that, what I mean is she would have been happy if her drawing had just been her dress, her socks, and her shoes. And I wanted her to draw the figure. And so I would be kind of coming back over and over again to her and saying to her, like, hey, let's get that figure drawn in there. Let's get that figure drawn in there. You know, but she was far more interested in the dress and the socks and the shoes. And so I think the weakest part of the drawing is actually some of the figurative stuff. But it's still this really nice drawing, I think, because there is a balance between the detail of the dress that she made and the socks and the shoes and the figure. But she was very stubborn. And, you know, you don't want to wait. You don't want to wait until the end to try to draw the face. Like, you know, if she hadn't been the student that she was, she could have spent whatever this was. I think it was about 15 hours of work here. And then she could have gone to do the face and mess up the whole drawing. And so, like, you can't do that. You need to work up the whole drawing simultaneously. This is a student that worked on this drawing with me. And I like to try to be like I like to try to like show students like different like ranges of results and like different ways that they were achieved. So this was achieved. This is all, you know, this none of this is like projected. Like she had to draw all of this. She used the grids to do that. This student here, this drawing was made over, we battled this drawing for about 11 weeks before she got to this place. And, you know, she really struggled on getting the values to really do what she needed them to do on the face. And she came to me in the beginning of the conversation with wanting to have a large open space where the drawing just was left open. And I agreed to that, but only if she did like the work on the face and the background. And so she did, but then we would do something like I'd say, okay, so like this eye now is in the wrong place and needs to move. And so then I would say, well, you can't just move that eye, you actually have to move both eyes or something. And so it was a real long struggle to make this drawing, but it's a really successful drawing in the end, looks a lot like her. This student is the student that did the landscape that I showed with all the trees on the ground. This is Wansu, and this was her self-portrait. And I think it's a really strong piece. Sadly, she went into art therapy rather than fine art, you know. I always lose the best ones to things that have a salary. But I'm sure she's a brilliant art therapist. And so her drawing, I think, a testament to her ability. This student worked with me for quite some time. Seraphim, and she was the one that did the example for you on the Edward Gorey handout with the room with the figures and the portraits. She was my TA, and she worked with me in like a number of classes, like 4 classes or something. Here we see her, like this is a really great capture, like a likeness of her, like her visage. She struggled for a long time with getting contrast. And that was one of the things that we worked on for a long time, was like getting her to build up contrast in her drawing so that there was a good range of values. This is Daisy. Daisy just graduated from Cal Arts with a degree in 3D animation. Seraphim just graduated from UW with honors in drawing and painting. Yuwin just graduated from UW with a degree in interdisciplinary visual arts. This drawing by Daisy is just like a really great example of how you can work with lighting to create dimensionality. You know, we have a really nice, strong light source, which is creating all these nice sort of like hard-edged planes, mixed within like these softer, more subtle transitionary planes. Okay. And then this, we've already gone over the requirements for your final exam. In you know, one of the next classes, I will, please ignore that. I always forget that's there and I forget I have to go change it. It's obviously not due December 10th.